group of American senators led by Marco Rubio have now written to the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ahead of his Beijing visit on the 5th of February, condemning Chinese aggression against India and Taiwan, calling China's actions unacceptable. The senators have said that Xi Jinping has engaged in unacceptable and provocative behavior in the Taiwan Strait and along the Himalayan border with India. We request that you use your visit to impress these points with your counterparts. If you fail to do so, we fear that these meetings will simply become a propaganda win for the CCP. It further also goes on to say that the CCP is the worst offender of human rights. Both the Biden and Trump administrations have determined that Beijing's actions against Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim ethnic groups in the Xinjiang region, including its system of mass surveillance and intermittent denial of individuals' right to peacefully practice their religion, and the use of forced labor, sexual violence, forced abortion and forced sterilization of women constitute genocide and crimes against humanity. It further also goes on to say that the CCP continues to deny basic human rights to other groups whom the regime deems a threat, such as Tibetans, Christians and other practitioners as well. The CCP is also responsible for fueling the fentanyl crisis in our country, a scourge which continues to kill Americans. Finally, the CCP also continues the horrible practice of wrongfully detaining US citizens. It's a lengthy letter. It further also says that Beijing has a long history of unfair trade practices and industrial espionage as well, which has caused immense harm to American workers and our economy. As I pointed out, it also says that if these matters are not taken into account when this visit happens, and if you fail to keep these issues in mind, and if the talks fail on these levels, then the fear is that these meetings will simply become a propaganda win for the CCP. As we pointed out, all of this comes before the scheduled visit on the 5th of February. The letter further goes on to say that the CCP has stepped up its aggression in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. According to the Biden administration's national security strategy, the PRC is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military and technological power to do it as well. It further says, as we've recently seen, the General Secretary Xi has engaged in unacceptable and provocative behavior in Taiwan Strait and along the Himalayan border with India. Beyond the Indo-Pacific, the CCP has stood up police, offices and intelligence collection outposts. Let's bring in our colleague Anand Narasimhan also, who is joining us from our newsroom. Anand, over to you. Take us through the fine print of this letter and the big takeaways.
Well, this letter has been written by multiple senators, led by Senator Marco Rubio and his colleagues. They have sent this letter to Blinken and Yellen. So the State of Treasury Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen, and of course US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, ahead of their Beijing visit. And they are saying that this is nothing, it will become a CCP propaganda visit if you do not raise the following issues: that giving the CCP a propaganda win and hold the CCP accountable for its egregious human rights abuses, unfair trade practices leading to the leading role in the fentanyl crisis, and aggression towards allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. So very clearly this has been mentioned. And then it says, we write in advance of your upcoming visits to the People's Republic of China, we urge you to use the trips to hold Chinese Communist Party accountable for its human rights violations, unfair trade practices and increasing aggression in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Anything less would be a concession to our country's greatest threat. The CCP is the worst offender of human rights. Both Biden and Trump administrations have determined that Beijing's actions against Uyghurs and other predominant Muslim ethnic groups in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, including its system of mass surveillance and internment, and they've listed out the entire aspect. Then they've also said the treatment threats such as Tibetans, Christians and of course Falun Gong practitioners. So they said you must pick it up. They said CCP is also responsible for fueling fentanyl crisis in our country, a scourge which has and continues to kill Americans. Then it comes down and says unfair trade practices of the CCP. Over the last several decades, PRC has engaged in methodical campaign to steal American intellectual property And finally, they come back and say CCP has stepped up its aggression in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. And according to the Biden administration's national security strategy, PRC is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military and technological power to do it. And they have shown, then as we have recently seen, General Secretary Xi has engaged in unacceptable, unprovocative behavior in the Taiwan Strait, along with the Himalayan border with India. Very clearly, this has been highlighted. Beyond the Indo-Pacific, CCP has stood up police officers in intelligence collection outposts in the US, Japan and throughout Europe to suppress dissidents and keep tabs on those who Beijing deems a threat. So very clearly, this has been mentioned that Chinese aggression against Taiwan, Chinese aggression on the Himalayan border with India should be raised, along with the Uyghur issue and, of course, the unfair trade practices of the Chinese establishment or the CCP.
Senators,
I have...
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Anand.
I think we have Andrew Kapleon with us on the phone line. Andrew, thank you for speaking with us. A strongly worded letter coming in from the Republicans led by Marco Rubio.
Yes. Hello.
Do you expect Antony Blinken and Janet Yellen to actually raise this with the CCP?
Well, I think that Blinken is scheduled to visit China, not just on the Indian-China question, but on a broader relations between the United States and China. This is very front and center on his mind. And of course, the Indian question may be just part of it, maybe not the biggest part of it. The biggest part of it is how to build guardrails between the United States and China in worsening relations, and to prevent a possibility of a hot conflict war. And that is the most important mission of Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken. But I think that there is, of course, a bipartisan consensus in the United States that China is now the existential threat to the American-led global order. So the United States is pushing against China 360 degrees. And what Blinken wants is to prevent this from degenerating into war.
But what is being highlighted is China's human rights violations in the Uyghur region or East Turkestan region, its treatment of Christians and also Falun Gong practitioners. What's also being highlighted is the unfair trade practices and industrial espionage, and they have highlighted the fentanyl crisis, which they have very clearly said that this is the reason for the death of, and continues to be the reason for the suffering of many American people. So that is something which is very clearly written in this letter.
Well, sure. I mean, the letter presumably is from the is it from the Indian member of parliament or the senator?
Senators, U.S. senators.
I think that this
it is U.S. senators led by
a part of
Sorry? This is U.S. senators led by Marco Rubio.
Okay, U.S. senator. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this
so
is
Chuck
only
Grassley,
one of
Bill
the,
Cassidy, Eric Schmidt, Dan Sullivan. There are many signatories to this letter.
Okay. In spite of the fact that there are many signatories, of course, Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, is instructed by President Biden. The mission is really the bigger picture, the kind of worsening relationship between China and the United States. And there are all these aspects. You mentioned human rights, you mentioned trade, you mentioned South China Sea, you mentioned the Indian border. All this is a part of this leading to a worsening relationship between the United States and China. The idea is to prevent this from degenerating into war, trying to build guardrails. As I was saying, this is a tall order because the Beijing's kind of reading is not transactional. If you, on the one hand, sticking knives at the back and so on, and while trying to create some positive outcomes, this is really, asking for the moon. So I think that Beijing is likely to react to this. And it's also pointed a way that in order to build a more
Because the
stable
Biden
relationship,
administration, Andrew,
you've got
has
to look
also
at it 360 degrees.
the Biden administration also, under the Biden administration, its own national security strategy has said that it's the only competitor with both the intent to reshape international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and also technological power to do it. I have Ambassador Malhotra with me. Namaste. I want to understand your point of view. Will the Republicans now put pressure on the Democrats to step up and take a position when they are in China? This is also a political game here in the run-up to elections in the US. What is the Biden government's position vis-a-vis China, and how are they going to assert themselves when Secretary Blinken visits Beijing?
Connection with the Anand and our guests as well, but that is the big story that we continue to track, which is the letter that has been written by the group of American senators led by Marco Rubio. Anand continues to be with us. Our colleague Abhishek also now joining us on the broadcast. Before we go back to Anand, Abhishek, we quickly want to understand there is a lot of pressure that's now being mounted, a red flag that's being raised by these US senators before the scheduled visit of Antony Blinken to Beijing on the 5th of February. As per the scheduled visits, what is the itinerary going to look like?
So this was in a way to study the relationship or the differences that the USA and China were having, especially in the background of Ukraine-Russia war that is ongoing, and the pandemic which has disrupted global supply chain and the economic and inflationary pressure that the world economies are having. So a lot of issues were uh, the blueprint where Secretary Blinken and Janet Yellen were going to discuss with their counterparts how to, because these are the two most powerful nations if you talk about in strategic terms and the economic terms at the current global stage. And to have a differences, I have dispute between two of them is not good for the global economy or the global strategic or the security architecture of the region. In that context, this visit is very much important. We'll have to see what are the areas of differences that these two sides will try to discuss and bring, bridge on that. And what are the but before this visit, the group of US senators have clearly flagged the issues that USA should not avoid raising when Secretary Blinken will be meeting with his Chinese counterpart, the new Foreign Minister of China, Qing. And these are the unfair trade practices that China has been doing for a very long time, territorial aggression that China has shown not only to Himalayan states or Himalayan border with India, but also the Japanese border. Indo-Pacific is one of the areas where not only USA but its partners like India, Australia, and Japan's interests are also being compromised by Chinese aggression. The human rights violation of Uyghurs and other sects are also one of the areas. So, like, this is kind of a pressure tactic that has been trying to, that is being built on Secretary Blinken that the USA, whenever has a chance to meet with Chinese senior leadership, these are the issues that USA should always flag and raise with the Chinese counterparts.
The other aspect is there is a clear shift or perhaps toning down of the rhetoric or the position between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. The Republican charge with the Biden administration has been aimed at the Biden family itself, with charges and allegations that Hunter Biden has huge interests in China and business interests, and President Biden will be keen to safeguard those interests, and that's why perhaps a softer line. But is that true, Abhishek? Because this letter itself talks about what the Democratic parties or the Democrat position has been, or the Biden administration's position has been as part of his national security strategy, where it identifies PRC as the only one competitor and the single biggest adversary. So both China and America recognize each other as the primary adversary.
So, I mean, something that started with during the Trump administration, that tariff barriers, and those were the times when it was called that tariff war between the two major global economic powerhouses are happening. And since then, these two countries have not been able to come to terms with those, high tariff barriers, which has impacted in a way their respective economies as well. Because China happens to be the factory of West and USA, and China is also Chinese products are also has huge market in European countries and US. And if the trade bilateral trade between these two sides are compromised or there are tariff barriers, then both the sides are going to be impacted by it. And this is what now
Right.
USA wants to have, that in the wake of this global crisis, supply chain disruptions, pandemic, fuel, fertilizer, multiple reasons are there where the senior leadership of economy like USA, West, China, they want to sit together and sort out their differences and to alleviate these areas of cooperation so that this inflationary pressure is reduced to a larger
Right.
extent, not only to this larger economy, but to smaller economies around the world as well.
Well, many would look at it as military might, but it's economic might that is important, and that's where who calls the shot. There is going to be a reorganization of the world order. America was under the pump after the fiasco of Afghanistan. China is going through recessionary trends, but if it does engineer a bounce back, then it would once again want to command its position vis-a-vis trade. There is a bit of a stretch at both ends. Both nations know they need to engage each other. China buys a huge amount of the American debt, despite both of them principally taking positions opposite to each other and wanting to control the axis of power. We'd see how it develops, and if there is a reaction that comes from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, before he embarks for Beijing, and a response to this letter, which is largely written by the Republicans led by Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio. Back to you in the studio.
Well, that really is the larger question. Will this, in fact, now be raised when this visit does happen in Beijing come the 5th of February? I'd like to thank our colleagues and guests as well